I would like to welcome you to the Marquette County Housing Solutions Summit. I'm Sarah Lucas from the Lake Superior Community Partnership, and I'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon to learn more about Marquette County's housing needs and some solutions. But before we get started with the presentations, I'm going to give a quick introduction and a little background about why we're here today and why we're hosting this event. The LSCP is a Marquette County-based organization that works with regional partners to build a vibrant regional economy. As an economic development organization, we provide a range of services to support business attraction and retention. We provide marketing and networking opportunities for business, and we conduct data analysis and research to help businesses better understand the market. We also advocate for the region's economy, businesses, and community, and we also act as a community partner to address some of the bigger issues that are impacting our economy. We organized this event around housing because we know that housing is an absolutely critical need for a sustainable economy. It's become impossible to talk about economic development without also talking about the workforce, and it's impossible to talk about the workforce without talking about housing. Our population has been declining in the UP, and with it, so has our ability to adequately staff and run our local businesses. So we hear endlessly from businesses and both owners and operators that housing is one of the biggest issues that they're dealing with right now. With a tight labor market, we need to be able to recruit new people to the community, and we're finding that we can't because they can't find a place to live. This is actively preventing some businesses from expanding and many people from moving here. With all of the attention that Marquette is getting right now, statewide and nationally, as a great place to live and work, we have an opportunity and stand a chance to attract new people to our community, but only if we have housing for those people. So understanding the urgency of the need, we've been working with different stakeholders to understand how we as a community can help meet some of those housing needs and what steps we need to take. Today's Housing Solutions Summit is a first step in building a bigger community dialogue around exactly what it is that we need and how to get there. So we're really grateful for our speakers today and for the work that they've done on this issue and their willingness to share it with the community today and tomorrow. And we're really grateful to you for taking the time over the next couple of days to learn about something that's really important to our community and something that we all have a part to play in. Before we get started with our first speakers, I'm going to share just a little bit of background to orient us to the problem and the discussion, just to give us all kind of a baseline understanding of why we are where we are and how we got there. First, I want to say that when we talk about housing, it's not just one single type of housing that we need. There's a full spectrum of housing needs out there in our community right now, from low-income households on up to higher-end homes. We often talk about where we should focus our conversations on housing, whether we're talking about low-income housing, if we need to talk about workforce housing, attainable housing, and there's a lot of questions on what those terms even mean. So I have a little bit of information here to give you a sense of what we're talking about when we refer to things like affordable housing or workforce or attainable housing. Just a few definitions here. There's a lot more detail around each of these, including different income levels and different price points. But just to give you a general sense of what we're talking about, all of those terms basically refer to housing that the workforce can afford, understanding that there's a big range in incomes and affordability for different parts of the workforce. I do think it's important to note, though, that most of those definitions can refer both to housing that's subsidized in a traditional sense, like with grants from the state, or housing that's essentially market rate and is unsubsidized with state or other programs. All of those definitions can get confusing, so there's a link in the chat to a document that provides some detailed definitions along with the values and rents that we're talking about for different income levels. So you can look back at that document as we get into some of the detail, so you know exactly what levels of housing we're talking about. But the fact is that we need a range of housing options. If we build even market rate housing, it'll help with a process known as filtering, which is when a household purchases a home, it frees up their previous home for another buyer, which then frees up another home for another buyer, and so on down the line. But the lack of housing has recently really limited that process and the ability of many people to find homes. And what we're seeing is that if one part of the housing market is stuck because they can't find another place, no matter what their income level, we're all stuck. So why is this happening? Why is it that so many people and so many different income levels can't find homes to rent or buy? The simplest way to talk about it is to simply say that the demand is a lot higher than the supply right now. We've been seeing a lot of demographic trends play out in the housing market. As our population ages, we've seen that our household sizes shrink, which means that we need more homes for even the same number of people. At the same time, millennials are starting their own households. With a population of 72 million, millennials are now the largest demographic in the US, and they're at their peak home buying age, the age where home ownership levels grow the most. Meanwhile, COVID has pushed up demand with low interest rates. And as people spend more time at home and many are able to work remotely, there's been a lot of interest in moving both within communities and to new ones. So all of these factors are kind of playing together to really drive up the demand for housing. Meanwhile, new home construction has been well below historical averages over the last decade at least, particularly for multifamily homes. And entry-level housing construction in particular has been lagging for decades. Post-recession, we saw a lot of financing changes playing a part in some of that lag in construction. It was harder to finance homes. We also have been experiencing issues with labor shortages, which makes development more difficult. We have complicated regulations at the local and state levels. And of course, development costs are high. They've been rising for years and have become increasingly unaffordable. I think another factor worth mentioning in the supply and demand question is the fact that a second home market has been made stronger by a vacation rental boom. And there have been a lot of conversions of year-round housing into short-term rentals, which takes some housing off the market in a time when we're experiencing an increased demand for year-round housing already. So we're not only not growing our housing stock, but we're actually losing some housing stock. So the problem is pretty clear. We need housing. Demand is stronger than supply, so we need to build more homes. The obvious question then is, why don't we just build those housing units? Why doesn't the market just respond to that? My favorite answer to that question, which I'm sure some of you have heard, is this line that for every complex problem, there's a solution that is clear, simple, and wrong. And housing is nothing if not complex. To apply to the equation. Housing at this point, you really can't to offer lower development costs, so a subsidy of some kind, and there are a few funding sources available to do that, especially in smaller cities and rural areas like Marquette County. We also have local government policies like zoning that can make it really difficult to build the type of housing that we need, particularly those smaller homes and multifamily homes that are really in demand from a lot of different demographics right now. And while local governments do have the ability to provide some kinds of tax incentives or contribute in other ways, state policy really limits their ability to participate in some of these solutions. And underlying all of that is the public's reaction to housing and to new housing development. There's very often a resistance to new development that's tied to both a fear of change and, in the case of housing, driven by negative stereotypes of what the homes will look like and who they'll be for. So for any project that public support or lack thereof can really be the wild card. You can have everything else in place, all the funding, all of the approvals, but if the public opposes it, it's going to be really difficult for your project to move forward. So that's why we're here today. We have a really complex problem on our hands, and we know that we need a lot of different partners at the table to address it. There's not a single silver bullet kind of solution that's going to solve all of these issues all at once. We need action from the state, we need action from local governments, from nonprofits and community organizations, and we need partnerships between all those players and the private sector development community in order to meet housing needs at the scale that the community really needs. And we also need the support of the public in order for projects to get off the ground. As I mentioned earlier, housing is an issue all over the country, and communities everywhere are going through this and figuring out how to deal with it. The ones that are really making a dent in the issue are the ones that decided many years ago, decades ago, that housing is a priority that needs local leadership and investment. So those communities have changed zoning, they've created new funding sources, offered tax incentives, and provided land to make sure new development occurs, and that it can accommodate the needs of the workforce. And they're most those initiatives are most successful when all of those things happen together, and when the communities have been really proactive about building partnerships between different parts of the community, whether it's public, private, or nonprofit partners. So one of the goals with our event today, as I mentioned, is to start building those partnerships and that level of support. Over the next couple of days, you'll be hearing about some of the discussions and initiatives that have been happening around housing needs locally, regionally, and at the state level. Today, we're kicking things off with a discussion about the county's housing needs with Ryan Susi from QPAD. And then we're going to hear from local and county partners about what tools they've been using or considering to address housing. Anne Giroux from the Land Bank Authority at Marquette County will explain what the Land Bank Authority is and how it works. And she'll be followed by a panel of local governments, including the cities of Ishpeming, Negaunee, and Marquette, as well as Marquette Township. So that's this afternoon. Tomorrow, we're going to hear more about some of the discussions at the state level around new funds for housing and some bills that could provide more tools for local governments to encourage development. We'll have speakers, including Luke Forrest from CEDM, the Community and Economic Development Association of Michigan, Kent Wood from the Housing Michigan Coalition, and Marty Fatante from InvestUP. They'll all be joining us to fill us in on what's been happening lately around some of those bigger state level conversations. After that, Marilyn Crowley from Michigan Community Capital, a nonprofit developer and finance institution, will walk us through an innovative housing project to give us some insight into how housing projects might be financed and what they need in terms of community support. But I'd really like to thank all of our speakers again for joining us. Their leadership is a real asset to our community, and we appreciate the time and information they're sharing with us over the next couple of days, as well as all of the work that they're doing on this really important issue for our economy.